For decades, the story of Noah's Ark has been the nail in the coffin for skeptics. Critics point to the math. How do you fit millions of species onto a wooden boat? How do you feed them? How do you stop the lions from eating the zebras for a year? To the modern scientific mind, it's a fairy tale, a physical impossibility that discredits the entire biblical record. But what if we've been looking at the Ark through the wrong end of the telescope? What if the Bible isn't a collection of primitive myths, but a technical manual for a technology we are only just beginning to understand? What if the Ark wasn't a boat, but a quantum machine? We often imagine Noah as a primitive carpenter with a stone axe, but the Bible tells a different story. According to the lineage in Genesis, Noah came from a world already undergoing an industrial revolution. There are several figures described as great city builders, such as Nimrod, and there was also Tubal-Cain, who is described as a forger of bronze and iron. So this was a world that knew architecture and metallurgy. And then in Genesis 5, Noah's father Lamech said that Noah is the one would know how to use these very same instruments, described in that verse as works of their hands, in order to preserve the earth. So, according to that verse, it wasn't just wood that Noah used, but it was every instrument and knowledge passed down from an earlier, highly advanced civilization. Mind you, in the book of Enoch, we are told that that civilization had inherited advanced knowledge of the cosmos from divine beings. We are talking about a pre-Diluvian world that may have possessed technology that would make our current Silicon Valley look like the Stone Age. Take the mysterious gopher wood, for instance, which is the material that Noah used to make the Ark. The word gopher appears only once in the entire Bible. And not only does this name appear nowhere else in the Bible, but nowhere else in history, so no one today knows what sort of material it was. And it also means it was not a naturally occurring material, but a fabricated composite, archetypal of that highly industrialized era. Something in the margins of a high-density carbon lattice. A pressurized hull capable of stabilizing a quantum field. In the context of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you could compare this to vibranium. This may have not been just wood and pitch, it may have been a complex combination of materials designed to stabilize atoms during electron orbital compression. You might say, shrinking animals is pure Marvel fiction, but look at the world around you today. 30 years ago, a supercomputer filled an entire room. Today, that same processing power is compressed into a smartphone in your pocket. We are already masters of compression. In our current labs, scientists are using implosion fabrication technology to shrink structures to 1/1000th of their original size with perfect precision. It's like the Ant-Man movie in real life. We are now starting to use extreme plasmons to compress electron waves. If we can now compress data and hardware today, and atoms, why do we find it impossible that an advanced pre-Diluvian civilization could compress biological mass? It's apparent that the ancient world had technology that we have just not yet figured out today. Because, take a look at the Giza pyramids, for example, or the array of out-of-place artifacts that defy our understanding of prehistoric engineering. Think about the logic we see in the Marvel movies, like the Ant-Man or Avengers Endgame. We saw Thanos' entire massive warship, and his thousands of soldiers and giant leviathans shrink down to fit through a single quantum tunnel the size of a helicopter landing pad. This could explain why Noah's device had a single window. It wasn't for aeration, it was a tunnel. If Noah's Ark was not just a boat, but quantum ark, he didn't need a container the size of a city. He needed a tunnel the size of a minivan. The animals wouldn't have been on the boat, but they would have been stored inside a quantum realm where space and time work differently. One of the most notable things about the Marvel Ant-Man movies is that the honeycomb, or hexagonal design, is a primary feature, serving as a recurring motif for Pym Particle technology. While this might just be a thematic design element in the science fiction franchise, what has caught our interest is that the etymology for the word gopher, which is the material that Noah used to build his ark, is that the word gopher is an English word derived from a word that means honeycomb, indicative of the honeycomb burrowing pattern created by the animal of the same name. And the source word also refers to a material that is not what it appears to be. And in quantum physics, the atomic structures of most carbon-based materials follow a hexagonal shape, or rather, a gopher shape. If you really think about it, this quantum postulate solves every single logical hole in the Noah story. First, there's the food issue. In the quantum realm, biological needs are suspended. No food, no waste, no predators. Then, there's the space issue. You can fit the genetic templates of every species on Earth into a space no larger than a briefcase if you remove the empty space between their atoms. But here's the most mind-blowing part: the time dilation. The Bible says Noah was on the ark for about a year. But according to the rules of quantum mechanics, time in the subatomic realm is not linear. This brilliantly aligns the Ice Age to the biblical timeline. If the atmosphere was clouded for a year, as what the Bible says, then temperatures would have plummeted and the water would have frozen. Job 38 says that there is a time when the face of the deep was frozen. And the biblical meaning of the term "the face of the deep" is all the waters of the oceans, and we get that from Genesis 1. So Job 38 essentially tells us that all the waters of the world were as if stone at some point in time. So Job 38 highlights an ice age as a consequence of the biblical flood. And if Noah was inside a quantum ark for a year, then that could translate to hundreds of thousands of years on the outside, because the rules of time work differently in a quantum realm. So while he was gone for only a few months, Earth's history aged millennia. And as for how kangaroos ended up in Australia, the same quantum device can land any specific entrant onto any particular point on a timeline, as was seen in Avengers Endgame using Tony Stark's GPS wristbands. But perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence is the sign of the rainbow. In the biblical text, a rainbow appears in the sky immediately after the Ark's mission is complete, a promise that the destruction is over. However, in the language of high-energy physics, this takes on a different meaning. When you collapse a massive energy field or close a quantum gate, the sudden release of particles often causes light diffraction and atmospheric refraction on a massive scale. To a primitive observer, this shimmering multicolored arc would look like a sign from the heavens. But to a scientist, it looks like the exhaust or the visual afterglow of a localized space-time event. So the biblical rainbow wasn't just a symbol, but may have been the physical signature of the quantum arc finally powering down. Another point to note is that the Bible never refers to Noah's device as a boat or a ship. It was called an ark. There were many ships and fleets mentioned in the Old Testament, but Noah's device was never referred to as a ship. Instead, it is only called an ark. And the word teva in Hebrew, which translates to ark, means a place of refuge. We often ridicule the ancient world because we suffer from the arrogance of the present. We think because we have digital screens and smartphones that our technology is superior. But even with our technology today, there are many lessons we can borrow from the past, especially if we take ancient scripts, like the Bible, not as fairy tales, but as manuals for a lost technology. Many of our greatest technologies today were inspired by science fiction stories from decades ago. Who is to say that the science fiction of the Bible isn't actually a legacy record of a piece of technology we appear to be missing? So before we dismiss the Ark as utter nonsense, we really should look at it as a blueprint. Maybe Noah wasn't just a fairy tale sailor. Maybe he was a technician of the highest order, preserving the files of Earth's biosphere in a quantum backup drive, just like we are learning how to do today with the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Maybe the story of Noah isn't a story of a primitive past, but a window into a possible future. It's a lesson that when the world faces a great recession, the answer isn't to go big, but to go smaller and smarter. Or perhaps as a critic, if you are just one of those that are adamant that Noah's story is pure hogwash, then why don't you look at it this way? What if somebody in our future time traveled to our past and told a story about our future, so that in our today, someone might build a quantum machine to preserve our world from a future incident? So maybe it's time we stop laughing at Noah's Ark and start looking at it as inspiration. Perhaps we might eventually bridge the quantum gap in our time. See you next time.